Good morning. Thank you very much for giving us a bit of your valuable time this morning. I hope you're all doing well. I'm going to get my disclaimers in early. There is a wild 6-year-old roaming my house. It is largely house trained, but the potential for a BBC News moment does exist. So if that does happen, my apologies in advance. Many of you I know looking at the registrations, but for anybody who doesn't know me, my name is Dave Adamson. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at EACS. So I've been with the business for about 5 years, spend much of my time visiting and talking to customers about what we do, or doing things like this, hosting events, discussing technology strategy with our customers, and hopefully adding a bit of value. Kevin's going to start us off today, so I'll hand over to Kevin, let him introduce himself, and away we go.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, good morning, everybody. My name's Kevin Timms. I am the CEO at EACS. But prior to that, I spent 30 years in manufacturing with Ford Motor Company and a number of CIO positions around the world. And in fact, for a couple of years, I was head of IT security for Ford Motor Company based in the US. So quite a bit of background on the subject that we're going to cover. So welcome, and if you can move to the next slide, Dave. So this is what we're going to cover. So as a CIO, what am I worried about from a security standpoint, and how COVID-19 is changing the landscape? We've seen quite a change in the way we're working, and then what can you do about it? And Dave will have a demo or two of some of the things that can be done to improve things. So lengthening of the shadows, what do I mean by this? Well, following the lockdown, people have obviously been working from home. That has changed the landscape and changed it in quite a number of fundamental ways. So let me explain. Go to the next slide. So these are the things that I worry about in terms of the way people are now working on unsecured networks at home. Access to business applications from that, staff using their own unsecured equipment. And there's sort of broadly, in my mind, two categories here. There is the whole security piece about unsecured equipment, remote devices, the protection of those, and unsecured networks, and the access to those applications. And then a bunch of stuff around the physical security, if you like, around disposal of confidential documents. That really is best tackled around policy, training, and awareness. So we're going to focus this session around some of those IT-related ones in terms of securing those and securing and knowing who is coming into your applications. Next slide, please. So COVID-19, and we've seen it in terms of work we've been doing for our clients since the end of March. We've seen a significant move to the cloud to enable people to access those applications more easily remotely. And they will need greater protection than has been seen before. That perimeter that we always think about in terms of the office and our network has become much bigger. It's extended into people's homes, their own technology, and their own networks. And identity management has become really critical. It's who is actually accessing our applications and data. And I heard a quote that was that identity is the new perimeter, and I think that's actually very true. Endpoint protection needs to continue to work. Can't rely on people coming into the office with their laptops once a week to do those updates. That has to be done now remotely. And I can't see the people. I need to know what they're doing, what they're working on, if they're available, and so on. And there are tools obviously around for that, but it has fundamentally changed the way we're working. Okay, next slide. So, in simple terms, the threat has not changed. In fact, it's probably increased. You know, we've seen phishing attacks and so forth related to COVID-19, and people using COVID-19, the bad guys using COVID-19 as a potential exploit vector. The management of IT security has become harder. There's more vulnerabilities to close. So basically, the shadows have increased. There's more vectors to be exploited. We're much more dispersed now. Things have changed, but obviously there's an awful lot of technology and capability out there that can be brought to bear to make sure that we do remain safe from an IT security standpoint. So I'm going to hand back to Dave, who's going to give you some examples of some of the things that we've been working on and focused on.
Thanks, Kevin. And I should have said up front, and I didn't. If you did have any questions today, feel free to submit them through the chat in the webinar application, and we can pick those up at the end. So trust is really important, and never more so than it is now. Trust takes many forms. You trust us to not harvest your personal information with the GDPR disclaimers that we have available. You trust EACS, some of you, to work with you on your business problems because of our reputation in the market. Many of you will have placed your trust in particular security vendors, and that might be from industry analysis or perhaps a recommendation from a peer in the industry. And trust is really important and should be the core topic, really, of your security strategy, deciding for your organisation what a safe position around trust really is. For some people, that will be a zero trust in a highly secure, highly restricted environment. For others, there's probably a bit too much trust. And for most people, and I think most sectors and most industries, and certainly where we are, it's an implied trust position, but with verification to make sure that people are who they say they are. Most of you are already living a trust but verify experience, so you're doing it with your online banking, you're using a text message or a card reader, and hopefully most of you are doing that at work by securing your systems with multi-factor authentication, which in my opinion is by far and away the single biggest thing that you can do to make a simple step up in your security posture. If you work in government or in a regulated sector, trust in your supply chain is probably something you need to think about. You probably trust your system administrator to have access to your CEO's mailbox in the event that it's necessary, but hopefully you trust him. Hopefully you've got systems in place to prove that trust is well placed should you ever need to verify that there's nothing nefarious happening. Verification can come in many forms, but one of the best ways you can do it as an organisation is to use the guidance that's laid out by the government. So both the National Cybersecurity Centre and the Cyber Essentials scheme that the government run are really good ways of just assessing your security posture and looking at how the controls around the perimeter and the different areas that are identified by those schemes are more important to you now than perhaps they were prior to the lockdown. It'd be remiss of me at this point not to say that if Cyber Essentials is something that you're interested in exploring, that is of course something EACS would be very happy to help you with. That's the only bit of selling I will do today. Now more than ever, I think you need to trust your staff, as working from home becomes the new normal and they're not present for you to keep an eye on, or indeed to tap a colleague on the shoulder and say, does this email look right to you? Have you got one of these? It's more important than it's ever been. According to one survey, 91% of cybersecurity attacks see their entry point as being a phishing email. I've certainly seen attempts on it at EACS, and I've seen successful phishing attacks in some of our customers. You might like to take the number with a pinch of salt, seeing as this survey was commissioned by a phishing security vendor. So should we in fact place our trust in the marketing of cybersecurity solutions? Hopefully this is where you turn to us either now or in the future to provide you a slightly more independent perspective. So why is it important? We're going to talk a bit about Microsoft's identity and access management solutions in a moment and show how we make use of some of these things at EACS. And they're a comprehensive, cloud-based leader in the market for managing access to applications and advanced identity protection. Azure Active Directory or Azure AD helps organizations manage and secure identity for their internal employees, for partners, for other third parties and customers that you might need to access applications and services. This graphic might be familiar to some of you, and please don't all rush off and change your password to correct horse battery staple, because it will be in every dictionary you can think of. But I often use this cartoon from the webcomic XKCD to do a better job than I ever can of explaining the importance of a good password strategy in helping to secure your identity. Good identity security is really important because, as Kevin said, the perimeter has changed. The traditional firewall is no longer enough, particularly in a much more home working oriented environment. Mobile working is now the norm and increasingly going to become the norm, I think, for many organisations, and certainly it is for EACS. So a multi-layered approach is now really a necessity and not just a nice to have. Although I've used passwords here to illustrate the point, identity-based security is more than just about passwords. Context is equally important. Being able to adopt a risk-based model to access your applications and data is a really good way of finding the all-important balance between security and usability. If you make it too hard, then people will look to try and bypass the controls that you put in place. So last bit before we get some techie stuff going, I pinched this from Microsoft's Zero Trust Maturity Model white paper. I'd encourage you to seek it out. There's a link on the bottom there, and we'll share the slides afterwards to help you think about what role trust should play in your security strategy. Security can be quite an overwhelming topic to address, but I think this graphic provides quite a simple and accessible way to think about the key areas that you need to focus on. And I often use it as inspiration, really, or as a starting point in customer meetings. By breaking down your security strategy into manageable components, it becomes simpler to start to address your own personal threat landscape. I'm going to pick out the identity pieces we've talked about previously and take you through a couple of examples. And if we've got time at the end, I'm going to show you another quick example of something else that we use. So the trust piece is what we'll be talking about in a moment, but I'll show you how we do some verification as well. So as I said, excuse me, now more than ever, people are at the heart of your risk, and identity verification is really key in helping mitigate this risk. One of the ways that we do this at EACS is we integrate many of our applications into a common identity provider. And in our case, like many of you, we've chosen Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. It helps us to manage and secure the identities for the employees and partners, as I talked about. And I'm going to show you how this quickly enables end users to be secure and productive, but also what the administrative access looks like with Azure AD, the administrative experience looks like with Azure AD. So we're going to go through onboarding a new third-party application into Azure Active Directory, configuring single sign-on, how we manage our collection of applications, and how we use conditional access policies to measure that risk-based approach to application access. Now, Azure AD can connect all of your applications from cloud SaaS applications to on-premises applications, and enabling applications to work with Azure AD is really straightforward, or can be really straightforward, slightly less so perhaps for an in-house custom app on occasion. But I'm going to show you how we would connect DocuSign up to Azure AD. So those of you who do project work with us, you'll periodically receive a DocuSign email asking you to sign off a statement of works or a purchase order or something like that. Internally, we manage access to that application using Azure Active Directory. So under the Enterprise Applications section, I have the application gallery. So the Azure AD application gallery has thousands of pre-integrated SaaS applications. But in my case, under the featured applications section here, so some really common ones that you'll be familiar with, I'm going to choose DocuSign. And then I'm going to add this application into my tenant. So now I need to go through some configuration so that my users don't need to have to remember another password to manage DocuSign, and they could just log in using their Windows credentials, which they're used to using. So I'm going to click on configuring single sign-on. And in here I can see the details that are required to configure single sign-on for this application. And as I scroll down, you can see I've hit the necessary prerequisites. I've filled in the information that I've obtained from my applications, and then if I test it, we can click right through. So now if I head back to the Enterprise Applications dashboard and into into collections, you can now see that I've got a selection of different criteria for the different types of roles that might exist within my business. So there's a marketing role, different designs, because I want to customize the application experience to the job function. So we're going to pick on sales and marketing. I know one of my colleagues from that department is on the call, so hopefully this is all very familiar to her. On the sales and marketing tab, I'm going to add another application. And now I can choose from the applications that have been configured within my environment. So in this case, I'm going to pick on DocuSign and add that into the application list. And then if I click on save, it's just hanging, if you bear with me a sec. There we go. I'm now back in the root of my Azure Active Directory. If I head into security section, I'm going to define now a conditional access policy. So conditional access lets us assess the security of allowing somebody access to our application. So that might be that I trust them more explicitly if they're inside the corporate network than if they're externally, or maybe if they're on a device that's enrolled in a device management solution. Kevin talks about the importance of endpoint management, particularly when people are working from home. That's a really important way to be able to verify the health of things that are connecting into your environment and make sure you're not unwittingly introducing any nasties. So I'm going to create a conditional access policy. Now you can either use the baked-in policies that cover most kind of basic scenarios, or you can build a custom policy if you need to. On this occasion, I'm going to have a look at what happens if we enable multi-factor authentication for high-risk sign-ins. So that's going to imply a degree of trust generally, but if the machine learning backed identity engine thinks there's something suspicious, it's going to drop into some security controls to verify that that identity is what it says it is. So I'm going to define the conditions, and my condition is going to be the sign-in risk. So I'm going to choose whether I want this enabled and at what level I want this policy to apply. So in this situation, we're going to have it as a high-risk policy. And once I've defined the condition, I need to define who it's going to apply to. So I'm going to grant access, but only when I enable multi-factor authentication. As you see here, I can do things like require devices to be marked as compliant, or to have particular client-side setup that I require. For my administrators, so we as a Microsoft partner are obliged by Microsoft to have multi-factor authentication turned on for every single user in our Active Directory. So not just our administrative users, but every standard user account. And then we use conditional access to lower the or relax the user experience slightly based on some trust conditions. But for our administrative accounts, and those are the types of things we might use to connect into your environment to help manage it, we always require multi-factor authentication. So in the require MFA for security admins role, I'm going to select specific groups that I require this to apply to. I'm going to choose that particular role. So if we think of that's the kind of admin experience of setting some of these things up, but then if you want to have a think about what the end user experience might look like, we've defined this policy into the sales and marketing team. So we've got our lady Joy, who's part of our sales and marketing department, and she's going to go through the end user experience of that risky sign-in policy applying. So we've got a standard Windows 10 login screen here. Joy starts her day by logging into a Windows 10 machine. This happens to be joined to Azure Active Directory, but it could equally be joined to Active Directory. But instead of logging in with a password, she uses an authentication key. So she uses a little hardware key fob that either uses near-field communication or a USB port to verify that she has the physical factor of authentication to go along with the attempt to log in. I'm just going to play a little video of that process. So she's inserting her security key. She then has to touch the key, and Joy is able to log in. Perhaps slightly faster than your average login. So Joy is now in, she's very advanced, she's in the new Chromium Edge browser, which I quite like. She's been single signed on through to the Office portal and the My Apps portals, which you can see up here. So she's set these as her home pages, or perhaps they've been set programmatically by the IT department. So thanks to the built-in integrations between Windows 10 and Azure AD, you get a really slick user experience. This organization have lots of applications available for their users, but fortunately with the application collections, she's able to see the things that are specific to her job role. So you can see over here, we've got a collection of tools that are prioritized for her particular role. And that's effectively a kind of curated application connection that the IT team have created for that job role. Now here you can see all of the applications that the organisation provides grouped into the different sections, the different collections. And at the top, if we click on the My Apps tab, you'll see that defined particularly for Joy's end user experience. If I then click on the Sales and Marketing tab, you can see things that are specific to that job function. So in her case, she's got her CRM system, maybe an expenses system, DocuSign, which we configured and published earlier. If I click on DocuSign and sign in, you can see she's redirected back to a Microsoft login page to access a DocuSign application. So she puts her credentials in, enters her password. She now gets a pop-up on her mobile phone because we've got multi-factor authentication configured. And she's going to use the Microsoft Authenticator app to approve access to this. I use the app all the time. I think it's really fantastic and a really easy way to up your security game. That, in a very whistle-stop tour, is some of what you can do with Azure Active Directory to help make sure that your employees and the important people within your organization particularly can perhaps have customized risk-based models. So you can define quite complex and quite granular policies based on a wide variety of conditions to really help secure access to your applications. as well as doing the configuration in the first place, of course, we also need to make sure that we're doing monitoring, logging, and alerting. So within Azure Active Directory, there are things called the risky sign-in report, the suspicious sign-ins. So your IT team need to be configuring those reports to make sure that they're being made aware in the event that a suspected breach or something suspicious is happening, and then they can control how that's remediated. Maybe they force the user to do a self-service password reset, or maybe they require them to call into the service desk. You can control that behavior. But as well as having the monitoring and the alerting and the logging in place, we also choose to continually test our particular set of security defenses. So like you, we have mail filtering, we have web filtering, we have antivirus on our machines, all the standard stuff you would expect to secure your laptop estate, your server estate, and your network. But those things change. They change over time as you bring new products in. Maybe as configuration changes are made, perhaps you enable or disable a particular feature and have some unintended consequence. And of course, the one thing that's changing around us all the time is the threat landscape. So new vulnerabilities are being discovered all the time, and the bad guys are attacking us in different ways. I'm just going to flip to a different window, if you'll bear with me momentarily. There we are. So hopefully you can all see that. This is the dashboard of an application we use called Simulate. No, or Simulate, sorry. I always call it Simulate, I get told off by them. It's Simulate because it's cyber security. It just happens to be simulating what's happening in your environment. So Simulate does not protect you against anything. It does not stop anything happening, but what it does is it makes you aware of the tools that you've invested in, and whether you can use those, whether your confidence in those tools is appropriately placed. So this is a lab environment that we use to demo the product, and this is the dashboard that we land on. And the way that Simulate, oops, excuse me, I've just accidentally stopped sharing as I dragged something out of the way. There we go. And the way that Simulate does this is by providing a risk score. So the overall score is rated out of 100. 100 is bad, 0 is good. Really anything in the 0 to 33 category is considered to be okay. Anything in the 33 to 66 category, you might want to be having a look at this, and anything in the 66 and above is a serious problem or a serious risk that you need to address. So we've deliberately configured this environment to be both good and bad in different areas. And Simulate has a number of different attack vectors that it simulates. So if I take you through them very quickly, we can test our email gateway. So those phishing attacks that we talked about, maybe malicious payloads and some emails coming in, we can make sure that we are appropriately protected against them. We can run some phishing campaigns, so we can simulate attacks on our end users and make sure that the training we've invested in, or maybe the training that we need a business case to invest in, is either being effective or not. We can see if somebody does penetrate our network, how easily they're able to move around inside it. So can they move from the the workstation VLAN to the server VLAN? Can they move from a PC to the CEO's PC and maybe access his mailbox rather than the mailbox that they use to initiate the attack? We can monitor data exfiltration. So if somebody does get in, can they get data back out again? We can monitor how effective our endpoint security system is against the threat landscape as it currently is. We can monitor our web application firewall. So if you're publishing a corporate internet site, maybe an e-commerce site, or a membership site, or any kind of internet-facing portal, you can test the security of your defenses that are in front of that and make sure they're appropriate. And then finally, the web gateway, which is outbound web filtering. So if your staff are visiting nefarious sites that you think you've blocked, but they're able to get through, or maybe able to execute malicious code that's being hosted on a website that you thought you'd blocked. Now, the neat thing about Simulate is all of the tests that it runs are non-invasive, completely safe, and entirely automated. So we don't actually have to do anything with this to do the assessments. We configure some runbooks to make it run automatically and go and test our estate based on a number of defined principles, and then it goes off and does it on whatever cadence we think is appropriate. Where the effort comes in is in the remediation, and I'll show you that in just a moment. On the right, you can see here the immediate threats dashboard, which I think is the kind of killer feature of this. If you cast your mind back to the days of WannaCry, when the NHS particularly was hit very hard and many organisations were, with a vulnerability that made its way out into the marketplace and was leaked by the NSA in error and then used by the bad guys to come and attack all sorts of organizations. That exploited a long known vulnerability that wasn't particularly well published, and all hell broke loose for a number of weeks, and some organizations never recovered. If those organizations had been running Simulate, within hours of the first WannaCry attack happening, Simulate would have published one of these things, an immediate threat assessment. And you'd come into it and we'd trigger our assessment, and that would go away and say, here's a new 0-day vulnerability. Your estate is or is not vulnerable. And if your estate is vulnerable, this is the attack vector, and this is what you need to do to remediate against it. So providing clear, actionable insight into what you need to do. As is always the way with a live demo, it isn't loading, which is probably my son hammering our internet connection, doing something, hopefully something educational, but I fear possibly something slightly more Xbox related. So we'll have another crack at one of these. It was ever thus. Instead, I will show you the reporting data. So Simulate provides two types of reporting data. It provides reporting data out to your management team, your executive team, to give them an assessment of where your security posture is. So maybe you need to build a business case for a particular cybersecurity initiative. This is a great way of expressing this in executive friendly language. Thankfully, when I'm selling internally, I'm selling to a CIO and Kevin, so it's a rather more straightforward conversation, but certainly many of our customers, will have non-technical decision makers who need technical things explaining to them in the appropriate language. I think Simulate do a really good job of that here, and they break down our attack position, or sorry, our vulnerability position by the different sectors. And the advanced persistent threat capability shows a simulation of what I like to call the blast radius, so the end-to-end vulnerability. Somebody exploited us somewhere up here. This is what they were able to do internally, and this is what they were able to do with our data. So showing the journey from the breach through to the data getting back out, I think that's extraordinarily valuable. We can also see some benchmarking against your industry. So in this case, we haven't defined an industry, but if you were a healthcare organization, for example, you'd see an industry average from memory of 56, but you might see that your particular organization is up in the 80s. So you start to get a feel for how your security posture compares to your peers. And all of those things I think are really important as security becomes a boardroom topic. At an individual assessment level, if I pick on the email gateway, we use Mimecast. Be no surprise to many of you who use Mimecast. We've configured a Mimecast demo tenant to run against our machine. And if I come down into the email gateway assessment, historically I've triggered one of these types of assessments. I've chosen my target. This happens to be offline, mainly because it's on a laptop in the office and nobody's in that particular office at the moment, so it's gone to sleep. But I've got a dummy laptop in the office with the Simulate agent installed, and I can trigger an email gateway assessment. What that does, if I come through into the reporting, is for your technical team, give you really low level detail and actionable insights into what you can do to protect yourself. So in this situation, we've got a pretty good score. Our Mimecast in this lab is configured really well, but it tells us what type of attack we're most vulnerable to, least vulnerable to, and what we're most vulnerable to, and what percentage of the attack got through. We can then view the individual attacks. If I pick one that was successful here, we can see that they've tried a simulation using a particular document file. And over on the right, we get all of the contextual information about that particular targeted attack. So it's going to tell us how it does this attack, so what it's going to do. It's going to reference the CVE database, so to provide us the external information around what that vulnerability is. But perhaps most important of all, it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do to protect against this exploit in the future. So you can configure your email gateway to block this exploit. And if your email gateway has a sandbox capability, you make sure it's configured appropriately to catch this type of exploit. Sorry, I just had a message which has paused screen sharing. Which I thought I had closed. Bear with me. There we go. So really clear, really actionable intel. And we, as I say, we run this internally. We use it across all of our threat vectors, if you like, to give us a really rounded view of how effective the security tools that we've invested in are. This is a great way of measuring proof of concepts as well. If you're looking at a new AV vendor, for example, you could stack them up side by side and see how the scoring happens. Sorry, bear with me again. I'm having a bit of technical trouble. We find it extraordinarily valuable, and in my view, it's a relatively sensible investment in terms of how it's priced to be something that you can up your defences with. It is a modular system, so each of the modules is, sorry, some persistent Teams notifications which are pausing my screen sharing. Move this onto another screen. There we go. It is a modular thing, so if all of these things don't apply to you, or if you wanted to test things gently, then you could pick on a particular module that you were concerned about and do some analysis on that specifically. With the guidance that was in the email gateway report that you saw, if we had made those changes and then reran the simulation, what you would see hopefully then is that your score would come down maybe to a 4 or a 3, and it would contribute to your overall blended score as well. So it's a really clear way of benchmarking our security posture at a point in time, but then automating that, you know, every day, every week, every month, whatever's the right cadence for your business. With that, I think I have rattled through in record time to get to the end of our allotted half hour. So with that, all it remains for me to say is, I can let this wake up. Thank you very much for sparing some time with us. I haven't seen any questions come in. If you did want to ask any questions, clearly pop them in the chat, or if you want to reach out to us afterwards, there's contact information at the bottom there. Give us a call, drop us an email. Feel free to connect with myself or Kevin on LinkedIn. Hopefully many of you will have an existing EACS client manager, so feel free to make contact with them if there's anything that's interesting from what we've talked about today. And with that, I'll say thank you very much for sparing some of your time this morning with us. I hope you're all staying safe and continue to do so. And we look forward to being able to come and see you properly in the not too distant future. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thanks all.